Should younger people today even aspire to own a home, or is the American dream, that version of it, dead?
The goal isn't to be rich. Rich is the things you see. Wealth is what you don't see. And this is what wealth is. Ideally, it's by the time you're 40. It's usually not, but it needs to be by the time you're 65 or 70, because that release of economic anxiety frees you up to focus on what is really important, and that is deep and meaningful relationships.
One of the things I love you talk about in the book, The Algebra of Wealth, is you talk about the challenge we have with our goals. The first is we set unrealistic goals, and then they're super long term. So we say things to ourselves like, well, in the next 12 months, I'm going to save $12,000. And it's like, we've never even saved $500. And you talk about this need to set a goal of like, this is how much I'm going to save this month. Like, this is where I'm going to start. And it's so interesting you talk about time and your work with young men, because I think time is so interesting, because I think today most people would rather finish their workday and we'd love to just switch on a show or doom scroll on TikTok. And so there is more time that could be engaged in creating other revenue streams, etc. But what is really blocking us from doing that? I think everyone knows they have time. They know they want to make more money, but there's something there that's just blocking us from getting activated. What have you found that is?
So I can't speak for the whole population, but generally speaking, the lack of executive function is the part of the brain that controls that is the prefrontal cortex, the kind of gas on, gas off. The part of the brain that says stop playing video games and start studying, that is maturing later and later in boys. It's somewhere between 12 and 18 months behind young women. So in many ways, a senior in high school, a woman who's applying to college, and a young man who's applying to college, senior in high school, the woman is competing against a 16-and-a-half-year-old. And as a result, fewer and fewer men are going to college. And we're in an economy where 40 years ago, 1 in 3 jobs needed a college degree. Now it's 2 in 3. Women are correctly and justifiably, especially young women, blowing by young men. They have more discipline. They have higher EQ. Quite frankly, they're just more mature. I say this in my own company. I have a lot of young people, a disproportionate amount of young people working in my organization. There's some very talented young men, but I would describe them kind of as dopey, almost a little boyish. I have some young women in my firm who could be the junior senator from Pennsylvania. Women are just maturing earlier. So there's certain biological things that get in the way of men having executive function. I also think that there's so much temptation. I think there's a little bit of a belief of kind of YOLO, this is it, live for today. I also think it's harder for them to save just because everything's so goddamn expensive.
It really is.
So it's discouraging for them. It's like, okay, I'm working my ass off and I can barely pay for my rent. So this is anecdotal evidence, but it largely represents the economy. When I got out of business school, the average salary was $100,000. I went to a quote unquote elite business school. I went to the Haas School. The average house in San Francisco cost $280,000, so 2.8 times the MBA salary. Now the kids at Haas, still an elite business school, incredible compensation, average $200,000 right out of business school. But the average home in San Francisco is $2.1 million. Why? Because as soon as you have a house, you become very concerned with traffic, and you start showing up to local review meetings and making sure no new housing is built, which is great if you already own a home, going back to the rejectionist strategy. But it's almost impossible now. It's almost like saving for a home is out of my reach. The travel industry has boomed. And my thesis is that you have millions of young people who are going into their mating years and decided, let's save for a house, let's save for a house. Then pre-pandemic, a house is $290K. Post-pandemic, it's $420. Interest rates from 3% to 7%. Average mortgage went from $1,100 to $2,200. All of a sudden, the American dream has become a hallucination, a fantasy.